What if your problem isn't that you quit too easily? What if discipline is not the thing you lack? And forcing yourself to stick with one thing has never actually been the answer. Because for some of you, the real struggle looks very different. You look at your life and you don't see chaos. You see possibility, a dozen different paths, a dozen futures that all feel true. Not distractions, but reflections of who you are. You're not afraid of hard work. You're not running from difficulty. You're frozen by a single, terrifying question. Which version of myself do I choose? This is the moment no one prepares you for. The moment where having too much potential becomes its own kind of prison. There's even a word society uses for people like you. They call you a dilettante. A jack of all trades, master of none. And once that label sticks, the anxiety follows. Because the very thing that feels like your greatest strength, your curiosity, your range, your hunger to learn, starts to feel like a career liability. Today, we're going to dismantle that fear. Not by telling you to just focus, not by forcing you into a smaller version of yourself, but by showing you a different geometry of success. A path designed for people who were never meant to be just one thing. Part 2. Why traditional career advice feels like a trap. To understand why you feel so conflicted, we have to look backward. For most of the last century, society rewarded a very specific type of mind, the specialist. The world was stable, predictable, structured. Careers followed straight lines. You picked a field early, stayed in it for decades, and were rewarded for going deeper and deeper into the same narrow slice of reality. Psychologists call this a kind learning environment. The rules are clear. The feedback is immediate. Do the same thing repeatedly, and you get better at it. It's almost like a chessboard. The pieces don't change. The moves are known. Mastery comes from repetition. This is the world that gave rise to the I-shaped person. One deep pillar of expertise, one identity, one professional story. And for a long time, that advice worked. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That is no longer the world we live in. Today, the environment is different, radically different. The rules change constantly. Feedback is delayed or unclear, and the patterns only make sense after the fact. Psychologists call this a wicked learning environment. To see the difference, imagine two professions. A golfer works in a kind environment. The course is the same. The rules never change. Every swing gives immediate feedback. A firefighter works in a wicked one. Every fire is different. The rules are unclear. What worked last time may fail completely this time. In a wicked world, hyper-specialization comes with a hidden cost. Blind spots. When reality shifts faster than your narrow expertise, depth alone is no longer enough. Now let's be very clear about something. Specialists still matter. Deep expertise is incredibly valuable. The specialist path is not wrong. The problem begins when it is treated as the only legitimate path. When one narrow standard is used to judge every kind of mind. That's when people like you start to feel broken. You internalize the message, I'm unfocused, I lack discipline, something must be wrong with me. When in reality, your brain may simply be built for a different kind of world. So if job titles aren't the right way to think about your future, what is? This is where everything changes. To build a career that fits your mind, you have to stop thinking in terms of roles and start thinking in terms of shapes. Part 3. The shapes that quietly define your career. Once you stop thinking in job titles, a clearer picture starts to emerge. Careers aren't really ladders. They're not even paths. They're shapes. The first and most familiar one is the I-shaped person. This is the classic specialist. One deep vertical pillar. A single domain of mastery built over years of focused effort. When people say, Just pick one thing and go all in. This is the shape they're imagining. And for the right kind of mind, in the right kind of environment, it works. At the opposite extreme is the dash-shaped person. A mile wide, an inch deep. They know a little about everything, just enough to be interesting, but never enough to feel grounded. This is where many curious people accidentally end up, not because they lack intelligence or effort, but because they try to pursue everything at the same time. And that creates a very specific kind of anxiety. You feel busy, but not solid. Informed, but not capable. Interested, but not confident. There's no pillar to stand on. No foundation that says, I can handle this. But these are not the only options. There is another shape, and for people like you, it's the one that finally makes sense. The M-shaped professional, sometimes called the polymath. Instead of one pillar, you build multiple deep pillars, just not all at once. Imagine it like this. Your first pillar might be data science. You go deep enough that it pays the bills. You understand the fundamentals. You can solve most real-world problems without panic. Your second pillar might be storytelling, not as a hobby, but as a craft you take seriously. You study structure, pacing, persuasion. And then there's the horizontal bar. Your interests in psychology, history, design, philosophy. Suddenly, you're not a distracted data scientist. You're the person who can turn complex data into a narrative a CEO actually understands. That combination is rare, and rarity is where value lives. What makes this possible is a mental skill most people never learn to name. It's called far transfer. A specialist mostly uses near transfer, applying a skill to a very similar problem. But a polymath sees structure, not surface details. They recognize patterns across domains. Someone who understands the branching structure of tree roots might suddenly see a better way to organize a database. A musician trained in harmony and counterpoint might look at a block of software code and instinctively feel where the structure is off. This is not randomness. This is pattern recognition at a higher level. And all those random interests you've collected over the years, they're not distractions. They're a library of metaphors your mind will draw from to create insights other people simply can't see. But there's a catch. This kind of life cannot be built accidentally. It requires a different strategy than the one you were taught. And that strategy begins with a counterintuitive rule. You cannot build all the pillars at once. Part 4. Serial Mastery. How to move without choosing forever. This is where most scanners get stuck. They understand the theory. They resonate with the idea of being M-shaped. But the moment comes to act, everything freezes, because one question refuses to go away. Which pillar do I choose first? The weight of that decision feels unbearable. Choose wrong, and you imagine wasting years of your life. Close one door, and it feels like you're betraying every other version of yourself. This anxiety stops more polymaths than lack of talent ever could. So here's the reframe that changes everything. You are not choosing for the rest of your life. You are choosing for this season. The strategy is called serial mastery. Instead of trying to build multiple pillars at the same time, which only drags you back into the shallow, anxious dash shape, you commit to one pillar, fully, for a defined period, usually somewhere between 6 and 18 months, long enough to go deep, short enough to feel survivable. This isn't about becoming a world-class expert. It's about reaching functional mastery, the point where you understand the core 80%, where you can solve most common problems without constantly running back to the instruction manual. And when your curiosity in that area feels satisfied, not exhausted, but complete for now, you make a deliberate decision. This is not quitting. This is graduation. A dabbler quits to escape discomfort. A polymath moves on because the foundation is secure. Now comes the most important part. How do you pick the first pillar? The secret is to lower the stakes. A good first pillar is often the one that creates stability, the the one that can become a good enough job. Something reliable, something that removes survival anxiety from the equation. Or it might be the pillar with the most energy right now, the one you find yourself thinking about even when no one is watching. There is no perfect choice. There is only a workable first step. Once you give yourself permission to focus, truly focus, something unexpected happens. The noise quiets. The guilt fades. Your scattered energy begins to cohere. But focus alone isn't enough, because even with serial mastery, there's another problem scanners face: burnout from instability. Which brings us to the role of your day job. Part 5. The day job is not the enemy, it's the platform. If your mind is wired for exploration, instability is more dangerous than boredom. And yet, many scanners are taught to believe the opposite. We're told that if we're not following our passion full-time, we're somehow selling out. But for a polymath, that advice can be quietly destructive. Because passion without stability doesn't lead to freedom, it leads to exhaustion. Many of the greatest polymaths in history understood this. Einstein didn't do his most revolutionary thinking in a prestigious lab. He worked as a patent clerk. That job didn't consume his identity. It didn't drain his cognitive energy. It provided something far more valuable: stable ground. A low-drain job gives you a surplus of your most precious resource: mental energy. And mental energy is the fuel polymaths run on. This is why reframing your day job is so important. It's not just about the paycheck. It's a strategic asset. A high-passion, high-stress job may sound exciting, but if it demands 110% of you, it leaves nothing left for exploration. Your curiosity starves. In contrast, a good enough job does something powerful. It removes fear from the system. It creates psychological safety. It gives your mind permission to roam. When survival is handled, creativity can breathe. This doesn't mean you should be unambitious. It means you should be strategic. Use your job as a platform, not a cage. Let it support the slow, intentional construction of your other pillars. But even with stability and focus, there's still one final obstacle. Your mind produces more ideas than it can possibly hold. And if you don't build a system to catch them, they will turn into overwhelm. Which brings us to the final piece. Part 6. Build a system that can hold your mind. Let's be honest. A scanner's brain generates more ideas than it can manage. Your mind is a high-output idea factory, but your working memory is a tiny workbench. If you try to keep everything on that bench at once, nothing gets built. This is why so many curious people feel overwhelmed, not because they lack focus, but because they're trying to hold too much internally. The solution is not more discipline, it's externalization. You need a place outside your head where ideas can live without demanding constant attention. One of the best examples of this comes from the sociologist Niklas Luhmann. Over his lifetime, he published more than 70 books, not because he worked harder than everyone else, but because he built a system. It was called a Zettelkasten. He didn't try to write entire books in one sitting. He captured one idea at a time. Each idea went onto a small card. Then he linked it to other related cards. Over decades, those connections grew into a living web of thought, a network so rich that new insights emerged automatically. The system did the remembering so his mind could keep exploring. You don't need index cards. A simple tool like Notion or Obsidian works perfectly. The principle is what matters. When you become fascinated with medieval architecture for a week, write it down. Capture what intrigued you. Store it. Then, and this is crucial, let the obsession go without guilt. You're not abandoning it, you're preserving it. Years from now, while working on a web design project, you might stumble across those old notes. And suddenly, you see it. The structure of a cathedral is the structure of the website you're trying to build. That moment feels like magic. But it's not magic. It's delayed connection. And it only happens if you save the dots so you can connect them later. With stability, serial mastery, and an external system, something shifts. Your curiosity stops fighting itself. It starts compounding. Which brings us to the final integration. Part 7. You were never broken. You were built for connection. Let's put all of this together. You are not unfocused. You are not lazy. And you do not lack grit. You are a scanner, a potential polymath. Your brain was never designed for the stable, predictable world that rewarded narrow specialization. It was designed to move between worlds, to see patterns others miss, to translate ideas across domains, to act as a bridge where knowledge would otherwise stay fragmented. That path won't always feel easy. Mastery still takes time. Depth still requires patience. But the difference is this. Now you have a map. And having a map changes everything. The self-blame begins to fade. The constant second-guessing quiets. In its place grows a calm, grounded confidence. Not because you have everything figured out, but because you finally understand how your mind works. So here's the path forward, distilled. Pick your first pillar. Not forever, just for this season. Build it with focus until it can support you. Use your job as stable ground, not a cage. Let it protect your energy. Build an external system to hold your ideas so your curiosity can stay free instead of frantic. You were never meant to master just one thing. You were meant to be the person who sees how everything connects. And if you're ready to take the next step, I've created a free guide for you called the Polymath Field Guide. It gives you a simple framework to audit your interests and begin designing your own M-shaped life. You can download it using the link in the description. Now, if you listened to this and thought, my problem isn't too many interests, my problem is that I quit the moment things get difficult. That's okay. It just means you're at a different point in the journey. I recommend starting with a previous video. It will help you build that first foundational muscle. You can click on it right here. Thanks for watching. I hope this gave you something you can actually use. And I'll see you in the next one.